All right. Good morning, class. We're going to talk about World War II today. We're going to talk about the Axis powers advancing through Europe. This is lesson 2 in our World War II topic. Here you can see Nazi helmets here on the left moving through, which I believe is Poland, as they advance on the Allies. In this lesson, we're going to trace the course of German aggression and British resistance in Europe. This war started in 1939, and for years, and it went all the way till 1945. So it was 6 years long. But the first 3 years, it was pretty much the British that were holding off the Nazis until the Soviet Union and the United States got involved on the side of the British. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about Nazi invasion of Soviet Union. We'll talk about how the same time, this was going on, you had the Japanese that were basically taking over parts of China. We talked about that in the last topic, and then they started taking over Southeast Asia and Philippines, and they were looking at the Pacific and trying to expand their empire out there. Some terms for this section: we're going to talk about Blitzkrieg, which is lightning war. This is a term, German term, that defined how the Nazi Germans fought. And I think to some extent, we can look back at World War I and see how they fought at the beginning of World War I and say, yeah, this is in their DNA, man. These guys, when they go to war, they like to send overwhelming force, right? Remember the scene from our world wars and World War I, where the British were waiting at the river there in Belgium for the Germans, and they just came with overwhelming force, right? Blitzkrieg, I think the way it's different is it's all about speed too. Dunkirk is a port town that was very important because what happened is, you had Nazi Germany invade Poland, and this is after they did a bunch of other stuff. And they did a bunch of other stuff, and the British government basically was allowing them to do it. It was a policy called appeasement. So the British government let them take over parts of Czechoslovakia, Austria. They took over Austria. And finally, when they invaded Poland, Britain and France said, enough's enough. Let's stop these guys. And the British had to send troops over to mainland Europe, right? Because Great Britain's on an island, basically a big island north of Europe proper. So they sent their troops over there to help the French and the Allies. And what happened was they got trapped. They got overwhelmed with the Blitzkrieg, and they got trapped in this port town called Dunkirk. And there were something like 200 to 300,000 troops, British and French, that were trapped there, and basically the Germans were coming towards them. And if you get a chance to see the movie Dunkirk, it's all about that evacuation, basically. What happens is Britain sends England sends a bunch of ships and boats not just military, but also like uh, merchant ships, that are like commercial, and also even private pleasure crafts, yachts, and stuff like that. Whatever they could get, they put the British Navy folks on board, and they sent it over there to evacuate the troops from Dunkirk. And that's why Dunkirk is important. And it was a successful evacuation. Most of the troops survived, and got back to England and lived to fight another day. It could have been the end of the war right there for Great Britain, had the Germans crushed the forces at Dunkirk, because most of the professional army from Britain was right there at one place. Winston Churchill is the prime minister at this time, and that's why I like to watch those two movies, Dunkirk and The Darkest Hour, which is a document, or not documentary, but a movie, a feature film about Winston Churchill and about his leadership during World War II. He was the British prime minister. And like I said, he's probably the reason we're not speaking German right now. He stood up to the Nazis, pushed aside another prime minister, Neville Chamberlain, who was promoting this idea of appeasement and just, hey, let's not make Nazi Germany mad. Let's just try to let them do what they want, and they'll leave us alone. And Churchill said, are you crazy? Like, you got to stand up to these guys. They're bullies, and if you don't stand up to them, they're just going to walk all over us. So he convinced Parliament to appoint him as prime minister, or to elect him as prime minister. Now, their system of government's a little different than ours. They have Parliament, not Congress, and they don't have a president. They have a prime minister, and the people of Great Britain don't elect the prime minister. It's the Parliament that does. So imagine if our Congress were to elect our president. That's how their system is set up. And they have a king at this point in time, and they have a queen today, right? So they are a monarchy. They're a parliamentary monarch. So Parliament has the power, the political power, but the king and the queen have their figureheads, and they have a moral authority, and they have some legal authority as well, especially at this time. So Winston Churchill gets the power, or gets the prime minister job and some political power. But at the same time, like he in The Darkest Hour, you can see that a lot of people are against him in Parliament. He doesn't have a lot of friends. He is blamed a little bit for losing a battle. He was a military man. He was the Secretary of the Navy. He lost a battle in World War I, and people never really respected him after that until this time. And he had to earn that respect during World War II. And it starts with him getting some respect from the king, even though the two were totally different. The king was very proper and very English, in terms of his demeanor. And Winston Churchill was definitely an Englishman, but his mom was American. She was an American woman. And he wasn't, even though he was wealthy when he grew up, his dad was a politician and he was pretty well off. He didn't really fit the mold of the perfect Englishman. He drank a lot, smoked cigars a lot. He was overweight. And like I said, some people blamed him for the some failures in World War I. And he had this idea of, hey, let's stand up to the Nazis. And a lot of people at this point in time were afraid of war because of World War One. They wanted to stay out of war. So he emerges as a leader in Great Britain and stands up to the Nazis, stands up to Hitler. Tojo, Hideki Tojo was a uh, a leader in Japan, and he became prime minister of Japan. He was a military leader. He was born to be a military leader. His father was a military leader, and he went to the best military schools. Went to fight in China when they went into Manchuria, and eventually rose to the level of prime minister, and had a lot of power in Japan, and was kind of the guy behind Pearl Harbor, and bombing the U.S. and bringing the U.S. into the war. Franklin Delano or Delano Roosevelt, FDR, was our president during this time, and he was the president he was elected to 4 times. This is before they had the two term limit, and he kept on getting reelected. He basically was the president during the Great Depression, and he was a Democrat from the Democratic Party, and put in a lot of social programs for people to stay working. And when World War II broke out, again, the U.S. was also very weary of war, and so they didn't want to rush into another war. So Congress actually passed a bunch of neutrality acts. They're called neutrality, to keep the U.S. neutral if there's another war in Europe. So FDR, his hands were tied, even though he seemed to like Churchill and he wanted to help the British people. There were still a lot of German Americans, right? So the country was torn a little bit between allegiances. And then you had Congress with their Neutrality Act keeping us neutral. So he couldn't really help too much at first. Joseph Stalin is the leader of the Soviet Union at this time, right? He was Stalin means the man of steel. It's a name that he took. He wasn't born with this name, and so that's what he tried to emulate, right? This man of steel. And we talked about a little bit about Russia in the previous topic. So Roosevelt, wanting to help in the war, but being unable to at the first few years, got Congress to pass the Lend and Lease Act. The Lend and Lease Act was a law that allowed the United States to lend money and lease assets to countries that promoted our ideals. And they saw our ideals as democracy, freedom, things like this. And so it was written in a way to give support to the British and to the other allies, right? And it did. It actually helped Britain and the Soviet Union fight the Germans, fight the Nazis. And then finally, the Atlantic Charter, FDR and Churchill had a secret meeting on a ship in the middle of the Atlantic, where they drew up plans for defeating Germany and for how to set up the world after World War II. One of the things they said is, people should be able to choose their own governments and not be controlled by other nations, right? This whole idea of taking over other nations had to end. And this was secret because, FDR was not supposed to be, into the war helping the British at this time. Okay, so the Allies eventually included Britain, France, Soviet Union, and China, and the United States. and then 43 other nations. Unlike the trench warfare, we had, you know, new machines, right? The planes, the tanks, they had advanced a lot since, and the bombs since World War I, right? In the early years, things went bad for the Allies. The Axis forces swept across Europe, North Africa, and Asia. Here are the British and French troops thinking that they're ready for the war on this Maginot or Maginot line, which was this line where they thought, oh, well, if there's a war, this is where it's going to be between France and Germany. But the Germans were smarter than that. They were like, you know what, we're going to attack through this forest area called the Ardennes, and we're not going to meet them on this line and get bogged down. Remember the idea of the blitzkrieg, right? Rapid. After the failure in Britain, Hitler, so Britain, you know, when Churchill took over, they stood strong, right? Churchill said, you know what, we're going to fight you in France. We're going to fight you in the seas. And guess what? At this point in time, the British had a stronger navy than the Germans. The Germans did pose a threat with their submarines, their U-boats, but Britain said, we're going to fight you in the streets. If you get over here in Britain, we're going to fight you in the fields. We'll fight you anywhere. They had years, like almost a year of consistent bombing of British cities by the Germans, and it was this constant threat of war that made the British people strong and united against the Nazis. And the Nazis never could invade Britain. They could never get their troops across the channel, the water, to invade the land, right? All they could do is fly their planes over the cities and bomb them. And so Germany actually had an alliance with the Soviet Union at the beginning of the war. They said, hey, if you come from the east and we come from the west, we'll take over Poland and some other places, right? Some other countries. Well, after Hitler was unable to conquer Britain, he turned his attention on, he basically stabbed Stalin in the back, right? He's turned his attention on the Soviet Union and started to invaded the Soviet Union, and this turns Stalin and the Soviets against the Germans. It was one of the costliest mistakes Hitler made, because now not only did he have to fight the Allies and the Britain on the west, he had already conquered France and Belgium, but he had Britain still there, and he had to fight them in the west. But now he was opening up a new enemy on the east with the Soviets. So just like World War I, now the Germans have to fight on two fronts. Now, one of Hitler's reasons for doing that is he hated communism, and also he believed that Japan, who was also one of it was at the beginning, the Axis was Japan, Italy, and Germany. And he believed, he talked to Japan and he said, hey, let's crush the Soviet Union, right? And so he figured that the Japanese would come from the east and attack the Soviets, and the Germans would come from the west. One of the things that crushed the Germans in By the way, the Germans almost toppled the Soviet government. They were at the doorstep of Moscow and Leningrad, which was St. Petersburg at the time, and they took over St. Petersburg, um, but Moscow, they were at the doorsteps, and what saved the Soviet Union was the Soviets fought hard. The people there they fought hard for their freedom, but it was also the winter. The winter came, and the Germans invaded at the beginning of summer. So when winter came and it dropped down to 0 degrees, they weren't ready for it. Just like Napoleon back in the 1800s wasn't ready for the Soviet winters, the Germans weren't ready for it. As I said, this is going into um, Poland. Operation Barbarossa is what they called it, and it was named after an old German military leader. Actually, I think this says this is going into the Soviet Union. So this is not Poland. This is a little bit later when the Germans actually turned their attention on Russia and the Soviet Union. As I mentioned, U.S. was neutral because of the laws in Congress. Roosevelt found ways around it, and the Lend and Lease Act. But he couldn't help Churchill as much as Churchill wanted to be helped. Britain definitely felt like they were alone in the war at the beginning, and you can see that from the movie The Darkest Hour, if you get a chance to watch that. So, but before the U.S. was even in the war, they started to sell bonds, defense bonds. What it is basically selling people a piece of paper for money. So people would give the government money. The government would give them this bond and say, hey, we're going to pay you back. It's going to be worth more money. And by the way, you're helping the U.S. With getting ready for the war, right? So that's that. I wanted to go now to look at the assignment real quick. So can you see right here the Pearson website? Let's take a look at this. Okay, so I assigned this video, so you're going to watch this video. Then you're going to go to this interactive. No, I don't think it's this one. You're going to go to this map, this interactive map. Okay, so here's Europe. You can see Britain, the United Kingdom, right here is an island, right? Here's where the war was. Here's Germany, right? So let's take a look. German expansion, the beginning, before the war even started, this is where the Germans and under Hitler took over. They took over Austria, and then they took over this part of Czechoslovakia, Sudetenland, right, where German speaking people lived, right? And that's when the British and the French were saying, oh, well, it's okay, let's appease them. If we give them that, then maybe they won't invade us, right? And then the war broke out. 1939, right? Then Germany forms an alliance with Italy and Japan. And then Germany takes the rest of Czechoslovakia, right? He signs an agreement with the Soviet Union over here, right? That they're going to basically split up this area, Estonia, all the way down to Romania, right? And Greece eventually. They're gonna and the Germans, they're looking at this as they saw this as, we need this land for our expansion, to feed our people, right? And we need this land for the natural resources, coal and all that stuff. So let's see what happens. So now the allies at this time are over these countries, right? Poland, you got North Africa, most of North Africa, right? Except for Libya. Libya was Axis. Egypt was allies, French Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and then France and the United Kingdom, which includes Northern Ireland, right? It's basically the United Kingdom is Scotland, Wales, England, and Northern Ireland. And Scotland, Wales, and England are all on this island here. And this part of Ireland is its own country, right, at this time. Okay. All right. So here's what happened. In 1939, the Non-Aggression Pact, that was between the Soviets and the Germans. That was where they agreed to take over this area. Germany moves in, Poland. The same time, the Soviet Union moves into Poland, Lithuania, like Latvia and Estonia. They take over that, right? Into Romania down here. 1940s, Germany takes over Denmark, Norway. They overrun France. They even get Libya to the Libyan forces, and to overrun most of North Africa, right? And then the Battle of Britain. This is the bombing, the consistent bombing from 1940 to 1941 of British cities. And you could see it wasn't just British, it was also up there in Scotland and in Glasgow, which is that top star. And then Wales and England, right down here. So the Germans were just constantly bombing, and they weren't just bombing military targets, they were bombing the cities. Eventually, the British would do the same thing to Germany, and bomb their cities. And then, as we talked about, Germany turns on, they can't defeat Britain, so they turn on the Soviet Union, and they just overrun most of Eastern or Western Soviet Union, right? And you can see Leningrad, that's St. Petersburg up there. And then you can see them right at the door of Moscow, right? Stalin was so scared at this time. He was basically, he thought that his own people were going to turn on him because he had failed them. And what they did is they really rallied behind him, and he found a new voice, and he was able to rally his people to hold strong against the Germans. At the same time, making a alliance with Britain to defeat the Germans. So that's that. As I said before, you're gonna basically watch the video, and then you're gonna do the biography assignments. I gave 3 of those, and the quiz, which I assigned the quiz. All those are on Google Classroom. I'm gonna put this video up there. There should be another video. It's gonna be this one. It's worth a lot of points, so it's a lot of work, but it's worth a lot of points. So any questions about any of this? All right, great. Well, I hope to see you on Thursday. And if you have any questions about the assignment as you're going through it, please let me know.